I stood in the checkout line at the discount grocery store, carefully counting out cash for my groceries, while my sister Veronica watched with barely concealed contempt. She'd insisted on driving me to the store, claiming concern about my situation, though we both knew she just wanted to witness my supposed poverty firsthand. "Are you sure you have enough?" Veronica asked loudly, her voice carrying to the other shoppers. "I can lend you $20 if you need it. I know things have been difficult since you lost your job." I hadn't lost my job. I'd taken a sabbatical from my position as a software engineer to work on a startup, but I'd let Veronica believe I'd been laid off because correcting her assumptions felt exhausting. My family had always underestimated me, and after 35 years, I'd stopped trying to prove myself to people who were determined to see me as a failure. "I'm fine," I replied, handing the cashier exact change for my modest purchase of rice, beans, and vegetables. "But thank you for the offer." Veronica sighed dramatically as we walked to her expensive SUV, my single grocery bag looking pathetic next to her designer purse. "I just worry about you, Olivia. You're living in that tiny apartment, driving that old car, barely making ends meet. Meanwhile, I've been so blessed with my success." Blessed with success was Veronica's favorite phrase, used frequently to remind everyone that she'd married well, lived in a mansion, and enjoyed a lifestyle of leisure and luxury. She conveniently forgot that her husband Blake had inherited his wealth rather than earned it, but such details never interfered with her sense of superiority. "I'm managing," I said, buckling my seatbelt as Veronica started the car. "Things aren't as bad as they might look." "Oh, sweetie," Veronica replied with false sympathy. "You don't have to pretend with me. I can see exactly how bad things are. That's why I wanted to talk to you about something important." Here it comes, I thought. Veronica always had an agenda when she offered help, some way to position herself as the generous, successful sister rescuing her struggling sibling. "Mother's 75th birthday is next month," Veronica continued. "The whole family is gathering at the country club for a celebration. Blake and I are hosting, of course, and we're covering all the expenses. But I wanted to check with you about whether you'd be comfortable attending, given your financial situation." She paused meaningfully. "I know these events can be difficult when you're struggling. Everyone will be dressed nicely, there will be expensive gifts, and people will ask about your life. I don't want you to feel embarrassed or out of place." The implication was clear. My presence would be an embarrassment, a reminder of failure at a celebration of family success. Veronica was giving me an out, framing it as concern while really suggesting I should skip the event to avoid bringing down the tone. "I'll be there," I said firmly. "I wouldn't miss Mother's birthday." Veronica's expression flickered with annoyance before smoothing back into false concern. "Of course, if you're sure. Though I should mention that gifts are expected to be quite generous this year. Blake and I are giving Mother a trip to Europe. I know you probably can't afford anything like that given your situation, but perhaps you could contribute to a group gift with our cousins?" "I'll handle my own gift," I replied. "Don't worry about me." The rest of the drive passed in uncomfortable silence. When Veronica dropped me off at my apartment building, a modest but clean complex in a middle-class neighborhood, she couldn't help one final comment. "Just let me know if you need help, okay? With the party, with bills, with anything. I know pride can make things difficult, but there's no shame in accepting assistance from family." "I appreciate it," I said, retrieving my grocery bag, "but I'm really doing fine." I watched Veronica drive away, probably already composing messages to our mother and siblings about my dire financial situation and her generous offers of help. Let her think what she wanted. The truth would come out soon enough. Inside my apartment, I unpacked my modest groceries and smiled. The rice and beans weren't all I ate, they were just what I bought when Veronica was watching. My pantry was well stocked with quality food purchased during private shopping trips, but maintaining the appearance of struggle required consistency. My apartment was similarly deceptive. It was small, but beautifully appointed, filled with carefully chosen furniture and artwork that looked inexpensive, but was actually quite valuable. I'd learned to hide wealth in plain sight, to live comfortably while appearing to struggle, because the alternative, revealing my actual financial situation, would invite questions and judgment I wasn't prepared to handle. The truth was complicated. 3 years ago, I developed a software application for streamlining data analysis in healthcare systems. I'd built it during evenings and weekends, while working my regular engineering job, never telling my family about the project, because they'd always dismissed my entrepreneurial ideas as impractical daydreaming. When the app was complete, I'd quietly launched it through a startup I'd incorporated under a different name. Within 6 months, it had been adopted by 12 major hospital systems. Within a year, a large tech company had acquired my startup for $18 million. I'd been 32 years old, and suddenly wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined, and I'd made a deliberate choice. I would tell no one in my family. The decision wasn't made out of spite or revenge, but from learned caution. My family had a history of treating my money as their money, making assumptions about what I should do with my resources, offering unsolicited advice about investments and expenditures, and generally viewing my success as something they were entitled to benefit from. When I'd gotten my first well-paying job, after college, my brother Nathan had immediately asked for a loan to start a business. When I'd bought my first car with my own earnings, my mother had suggested I should have bought something cheaper and given her the difference. When I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small condo, my father had criticized my choice of neighborhood and tried to convince me to buy a larger place where family could stay when visiting. They meant well, probably. But their constant input and assumptions about my obligations had been exhausting. So when $8 million landed in my account, I decided to see what would happen if my family thought I had nothing. The experiment had been more revealing than I'd expected. Without money as a factor, my family's true feelings about me became clear. Veronica, who'd always been competitive, became openly condescending. Nathan, who'd borrowed $3,000 from me 5 years ago and never repaid it, stopped calling except when he needed something. My parents, while not unkind, clearly favored my more successful siblings. Veronica with her wealthy marriage, and Nathan with his moderately successful sales career. I'd become the family disappointment, the cautionary tale, the sister who'd never quite figured things out. And honestly, it was freeing. Without expectations or pressure to behave a certain way, I'd been able to focus on what actually mattered to me. I'd invested most of the money, conservatively, lived on the returns, and spent my time on projects I cared about, developing new software applications, mentoring young engineers, volunteering with nonprofits focused on technology education. I worked when I wanted, on what I wanted, without answering to anyone. My sabbatical from my engineering job was actually retirement at 35. My tiny apartment was a choice, not a necessity. I preferred small spaces, and had no desire for the oversized houses my siblings saw as success markers. My old car was a 12-year-old sedan I'd maintained perfectly, and had no reason to replace. I wasn't broke, I was free. But I'd let them think otherwise, because their assumptions revealed truths about our relationships that I needed to see. Now, with Mother's 75th birthday approaching, I was beginning to think it might be time for those truths to become clear to everyone else too. Over the next 3 weeks, the family dynamic around the birthday party intensified. Veronica called repeatedly with updates about the celebration, each call containing subtle digs about my situation and offers of help that felt more like reminders of my supposed failure. Blake and I hired a photographer for the event, Veronica mentioned during one call. Professional portraits of the whole family. I'm sure you'll want to look your best despite your circumstances. I could lend you a dress if you need something nice to wear. I have a dress, I replied. Wonderful. Just make sure it's appropriate for the country club dress code. They can be particular about these things, and I'd hate for you to feel uncomfortable. Nathan called once, ostensibly to discuss the party, but really to probe my financial situation. Veronica mentioned you're going through a rough patch, he said. If you need money for Mom's gift, I could spot you a couple hundred. Though I'd need it back pretty soon since Melissa and I are planning a vacation. I don't need money, I said, but thanks for offering. Right, of course. Pride and all that. Look, there's no shame in being broke, Liv. It happens to people. You just have to rebuild, get back on your feet. Maybe I could help you network, find you a decent job." The condescension was breathtaking, particularly from someone who still owed me money from 5 years ago and had forgotten completely about that debt. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. My mother called most frequently, her concern more genuine, but still rooted in the assumption that I was struggling and needed guidance. "Sweetheart, Veronica tells me you've been having difficulties," Mother began during one conversation. "I want you to know that your father and I don't judge you for how things have turned out. Not everyone can be successful in the same ways, and that's perfectly fine." "Thanks, Mom," I said, biting back the urge to correct her assumptions. Though I should mention I'm actually doing quite well. "Of course you are, dear, that's the spirit. Staying positive is so important when you're facing challenges. Now, about the party. I don't want you to feel pressured to bring an expensive gift. Your presence is gift enough." The irony was that I'd already purchased Mother's gift, something far more generous than the European trip Veronica was so proud of providing. But I said nothing, letting Mother continue believing I could barely afford to attend. "I also wanted to mention," Mother continued carefully, "that your cousin Gregory will be at the party. You remember Gregory? He's a senior vice president at that investment firm now. Veronica thought perhaps you two might talk, that he might have some career advice or connections that could help you get back on your feet." They were trying to set me up with career counseling from a cousin I'd seen 3 times in the past decade. The level of concern about my supposed poverty was becoming almost comical. "I'll be happy to see Gregory," I said. "Though I don't need career advice." "Of course not," Mother replied in that tone that meant she absolutely thought I did need advice but was too polite to push harder. "I'm just glad you'll be there to celebrate with us." The party was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the country club, where Veronica and Blake were members. As the date approached, I made careful preparations. I purchased a dress that was elegant and expensive, without being flashy, perfect for the occasion, but giving no obvious indication of its designer label or significant cost. I also finalized arrangements for my gift to Mother, which had required considerable planning and coordination. The gift wasn't just expensive, it was meaningful in ways that Veronica's trip to Europe couldn't match. 3 days before the party, I received an unexpected call from Blake, Veronica's husband. "Olivia, I hope I'm not overstepping," Blake began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to be diplomatic. "But Veronica mentioned you might be having trouble covering the costs of attending the party, transportation, gift, that sort of thing. I wanted to offer to help." This was new. Veronica must have really been painting a dire picture of my situation if Blake was calling to offer financial assistance. "That's very kind, but unnecessary," I replied. "I have everything handled." "Are you sure?" "Because there's no shame in accepting help. We're family after all. In fact, I was thinking I might have a job opportunity for you. My company is always looking for good people, and while it might not be exactly what you were doing before, it could provide stability while you get back on your feet." Blake was offering me a job at his company, probably some entry-level position that he considered generous given my supposed circumstances. The man had inherited his wealth and ran a moderately successful but unremarkable business selling industrial supplies, yet he felt qualified to offer me career guidance. "I appreciate you thinking of me," I said, "but I'm not looking for a job right now." "Right, of course, pride, I understand. But Olivia, sometimes we have to put pride aside and accept reality. From what Veronica tells me, you're really struggling. There's no shame in that, but there is shame in refusing help when people care about you." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Blake alternating between offering assistance and gently lecturing about the importance of being realistic about my situation. I let him talk, responding with non-committal politeness until he finally ran out of advice to give. After hanging up, I sat quietly, reflecting on how thoroughly my family had constructed a narrative about my life without any actual knowledge of my circumstances. They'd seen what they expected to see. A sister who'd always been smart but impractical, who'd never quite achieved the conventional markers of success they valued, who'd now apparently hit rock bottom and was too proud to accept help. The narrative was so complete, so believed by everyone involved, that no amount of gentle correction had made any difference. So, I'd stop trying to correct it. Let them believe what they wanted. The truth would be revealed soon enough, and the revelation would teach them something important about assumptions and the different forms success could take. The night before Mother's party, I received a final call from Veronica. "I just wanted to check in one more time about tomorrow," she said. "Make sure you're still planning to come, and that you're comfortable with everything." "I'll be there," I confirmed. "And I'm very comfortable with everything." "Good. I also wanted to give you a heads up that people will probably ask about your life, your work situation. I hope you won't be offended, but I've explained to some relatives about your circumstances, so they don't inadvertently embarrass you by asking difficult questions." So, Veronica had been spreading the word about my supposed poverty to the entire family. Perfect. That would make the truth even more impactful when it emerged. "That was thoughtful of you," I said, meaning it ironically, but letting Veronica interpret it as genuine gratitude. "I also wanted to say," Veronica continued, her voice taking on a tone of forced magnanimity, "that I'm proud of you for coming tomorrow despite everything. It takes courage to face family when you're going through difficulties. And I want you to know that Blake and I are here for you, whatever you need." "Thank you," I replied simply. "I'll see you tomorrow." That night, I carefully laid out my dress, shoes, and accessories. I reviewed the arrangements for Mother's gift one final time, confirming everything was in place. And I allowed myself a moment of anticipation for what tomorrow would bring. Not with malice or desire for revenge, but with the simple satisfaction of knowing that truth would finally replace assumption. The country club was elegant and perfectly appointed when I arrived Saturday evening. Veronica had clearly spared no expense, decorating the private dining room with flowers, candles, and photographs of Mother throughout her 75 years. Family members were already arriving, greeting each other with the practiced warmth of people who saw each other primarily at obligatory gatherings. I walked in wearing my carefully chosen dress, carrying a modest gift bag that gave no indication of its actual contents. Several relatives looked at me with expressions mixing pity and awkward sympathy, apparently having been briefed by Veronica about my situation. "Olivia, so good to see you," my Aunt Patricia said with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Veronica mentioned you've been going through a challenging time. How are you holding up?" "I'm doing very well, actually," I replied. "Thank you for asking." "Well, you certainly look lovely," Aunt Patricia said in that tone that implied surprise, as if being poor meant I shouldn't be able to dress nicely. "That's a beautiful dress." "Thank you," I said, not mentioning that the dress had cost $3,000 or that I owned several others equally expensive. Cousin Gregory approached, hand extended, wearing the confident smile of someone about to offer unsolicited career advice. "Olivia, great to see you. Your mother mentioned you might want to talk about job opportunities. I'd be happy to look at your resume, make some calls. The market's tough right now, but with the right connections, we can probably find something for you." "I appreciate that, Gregory," I replied, "but I'm actually quite happy with my current situation." "Right, of course. But just in case things change, the offer stands. No shame in needing help, especially in your circumstances." The phrase "in your circumstances" was apparently the evening's theme. Everyone had been briefed on my poverty and was treating me with the careful sympathy reserved for relatives who'd fallen on hard times. Veronica appeared, looking stunning in an expensive designer gown, Blake at her side in a perfectly tailored suit. "Olivia, you made it." Veronica embraced me with performance-level warmth. "Everyone, my sister is here, and doesn't she look wonderful?" The gathering continued, people arriving and offering their carefully coached sympathy. Nathan showed up with his wife Melissa, both of them treating me with exaggerated friendliness that felt more condescending than kind. "If you need a place to stay," Nathan offered quietly, "Melissa and I have that guest room. It's yours if things get too difficult with rent." "That's generous," I replied, "but I'm fine where I am." Sure, just putting it out there, no judgment." Mother arrived to great fanfare, looking radiant at 75 in an elegant dress that Veronica had clearly helped choose. She made the rounds greeting family, saving me for last with a hug that felt more pitying than celebratory. "My darling Olivia," she said, "I'm so glad you're here despite everything you're dealing with. Your presence is the best gift you could give me." "Well, I brought another gift too," I said with a slight smile. "But that comes later." The evening proceeded through cocktails and dinner, with multiple toasts to Mother's longevity and health. Veronica gave a speech about family, about Mother's strength and wisdom, about how blessed they all were. Blake presented their gift, the European trip, announced with great ceremony, to enthusiastic applause and Mother's tearful gratitude. "Blake and I wanted to give you the experience of a lifetime," Veronica announced. 3 weeks in Europe, all expenses paid, seeing all the places you've always dreamed of visiting. It was a generous gift, undoubtedly expensive, and Mother was genuinely moved. Other relatives presented their gifts, jewelry, artwork, contributions to the group trip fund. Each gift was received graciously, acknowledged publicly, adding to the celebration's warmth. Finally, it was my turn. I stood with my modest gift bag, feeling dozens of eyes on me with varying degrees of pity, curiosity, and awkward sympathy. Everyone had been briefed on my poverty. Everyone expected something small, perhaps handmade or sentimental, given my supposed inability to afford anything substantial. "Mother," I began, "choosing a gift for you was challenging, because what do you give someone who's given you everything? But I thought about what would be most meaningful, what would honor not just your 75th birthday, but everything you've represented in our lives." I pulled out an envelope from the gift bag. Inside was a single document, professionally printed and bound. "You've always talked about the house you grew up in," I continued, "your childhood home in Vermont that was sold decades ago after Grandma and Grandpa passed. You've mentioned many times how much you missed that place, the memories it held, the connection to your parents." Mother's eyes were already filling with tears, though she didn't yet understand where this was going. "I've purchased that house," I said simply. "It's been fully restored to how you remember it from your childhood. The deed is in your name. It's yours again, to visit whenever you want, to share with family, to pass on to another generation. Your childhood home, your memories, your connection to your parents, restored." The room went absolutely silent. Mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. That's not possible," she whispered. "The house must be worth—" "It's been appraised at $1.2 million, I confirmed. "The restoration cost another $300,000. But it's done. It's yours, and I've established a trust fund with enough money to cover maintenance, property taxes, and upkeep in perpetuity." I handed her the envelope containing the deed, the trust documents, and photographs of the beautifully restored home. Mother took it with shaking hands, unable to speak through her tears. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by Mother's quiet, sobbing as she looked through the documents and photographs showing her childhood home exactly as she remembered it. Veronica had gone pale. Nathan's mouth was literally hanging open. Blake looked like he'd been slapped. Cousin Gregory's confident smile had frozen into an expression of shock. All around the room, relatives who'd spent the evening treating me with pitying condescension were staring with various expressions of confusion, disbelief, and dawning realization. "Hell," Nathan finally managed. "How could you possibly afford this?" "I'm not broke," I said calmly. "I've never been broke. 3 years ago, I sold a software company I'd built for $18 million. I've been living on the investment returns ever since, which is considerably more than I need for a comfortable life." The words landed like bombs. Veronica actually took a step backward. Mother looked up from the photographs with an expression mixing joy, confusion, and something like betrayal. $18 million? She repeated. "But Veronica said you'd lost your job, that you were struggling." "I took a sabbatical to work on personal projects," I corrected. "I never lost my job, and I'm certainly not struggling. I chose to let you all believe that because your assumptions revealed something I needed to understand about our family dynamics." I looked around the room at the faces of relatives who'd spent weeks offering me sympathy, advice, and carefully condescending assistance. Every time someone assumed I was poor, I corrected them gently. But those corrections were dismissed or ignored because you'd all decided what my story was, regardless of reality. I turned to Veronica. You drove me to the discount grocery store to witness my poverty. You offered to lend me a dress because you assumed I couldn't afford appropriate clothing. You literally told relatives not to ask me difficult questions because you'd explained my circumstances. Veronica's face had gone from pale to red. You lied to us. I never lied, I corrected. I simply didn't correct your false assumptions. There's a difference. When you asked if I was managing, I said yes. When you offered help, I said I didn't need it. But you all heard what you expected to hear rather than what I actually said. I turned to Nathan. You offered to loan me a couple $100 for Mother's gift. You, who borrowed $3,000 from me 5 years ago and never repaid it, who hasn't called me for anything except favors in years, suddenly wanted to help me network for a job. Nathan had the grace to look ashamed. I forgot about that loan. Of course you did. Because you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a cautionary tale. The sister who never figured things out, who needed saving, who required your condescending advice about rebuilding my life. I looked at Blake. You offered me a job, probably entry-level, thinking you were being generous. You, who've never worked anywhere except the company you inherited, felt qualified to give me career guidance. Blake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And Gregory, I continued, addressing my cousin who'd so confidently offered to look at my resume, you were ready to make calls, use your connections to find something for me. Did it occur to you to ask what I actually did for work? To wonder why I might not need your help? Gregory looked down at his expensive shoes, unable to meet my eyes. Mother had recovered enough to speak, though her voice was shaky. Why, Olivia? Why let us think you were struggling if you weren't? Because I needed to know who you all really were, I replied honestly. When you thought I had money, I was valuable, someone to borrow from, someone whose success reflected well on the family, someone worth investing time in. When you thought I had nothing, I became a burden, an embarrassment, someone to be managed and pitied. I gestured around the room. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating you, Mother. And it still is. Your gift is genuine from my heart, honoring everything you've meant to me. But it's also a demonstration that assumptions about success and worth are often completely wrong. You could have just told us, Veronica said, finding her voice. You could have been honest instead of letting us make fools of ourselves. Would you have believed me? I challenged. Every time I said I was fine, you dismissed it as pride or denial. You'd constructed such a complete narrative about my failure that truth couldn't penetrate it. So I stopped trying to penetrate it and let you reveal who you were when you thought I was worthless. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, heavy with implications people were still processing. Finally, Mother stood, still holding the envelope with the deed to her childhood home. This gift, she said, her voice thick with emotion, is the most meaningful thing anyone has ever given me. Not because of the money, though that's staggering, but because of the thought, the planning, the understanding of what would matter most to me. She walked over and embraced me tightly. Thank you. For this. For being here, and for teaching all of us, including me, a lesson we apparently needed to learn. She turned to address the room. My daughter is right. We made assumptions, treated her poorly based on those assumptions, and never questioned whether we might be wrong. That's on us, not on her. The party continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Some relatives approached to apologize, their earlier condescension replaced with genuine contrition. Others kept their distance, apparently uncomfortable with being confronted with their own behavior. Veronica eventually approached, her earlier confidence completely deflated. I don't know what to say, she admitted. I was so certain you were struggling, so convinced I needed to help you, that I never actually listened when you said you were fine. You wanted me to be struggling, I replied honestly. Because my supposed failure made your success feel more significant. That's what I needed you to understand. Veronica looked stricken. That's not, I didn't mean. She stopped, unable to complete the denial because we both knew it was true. I'm sorry, she finally said. For the condescension, the assumptions, the way I treated you. You deserved better. Yes, I did, I agreed. But I also learned something valuable. That my worth isn't dependent on anyone else's recognition or approval. That I can be happy and successful on my own terms, regardless of what my family thinks. Nathan approached next, his earlier confidence completely gone. About those $3,000 I borrowed. Consider it forgotten, I said. Though you might want to examine why you felt comfortable offering me $200 after never repaying $3,000. The double standard is interesting. Nathan winced but nodded. You're right. I was being a hypocrite, and I'm sorry. Blake and Gregory both apologized from a distance, apparently too embarrassed to approach directly. I accepted their contrition with gracious nods, not interested in prolonging their discomfort but acknowledging their recognition that they'd behaved poorly. The evening wound down with a very different energy than it had begun. Mother kept looking at the photographs of her restored childhood home. Tears streaming down her face intermittently, as the reality of the gift sank in. As guests began leaving, many stopped to speak with me, their treatment notably different from earlier in the evening. The pitying condescension had been replaced with a mixture of respect, embarrassment, and genuine curiosity about my life and work. After the party ended, and most relatives had departed, my immediate family gathered in a smaller room: mother, father, Veronica, Nathan, and me. The silence was awkward, everyone processing what had been revealed and what it meant for our relationships going forward. I owe you an apology, my father said finally. He'd been quiet during the party, watching everything unfold with thoughtful attention. Your mother and I assumed Veronica was right about your circumstances. We accepted her narrative without verifying it with you directly. That was lazy parenting and insulting to you. We should have known you better, Mother added. Should have trusted that you'd tell us if you needed help, should have recognized that you were capable of navigating your life without our interference or assumptions. I appreciated their acknowledgement, though it didn't erase years of being underestimated and dismissed. The money isn't the point, I said. I didn't reveal my financial situation to brag or to make anyone feel bad. I did it because you all needed to understand that success looks different for different people, and that assumptions about someone's worth based on external markers are fundamentally flawed. Veronica spoke up, her voice subdued. You're right, I defined success narrowly: big house, expensive lifestyle, visible wealth. I dismissed your choices as failure because they didn't match my definition. That was arrogant and wrong. And I made it worse, Nathan added, by trying to help from a position of imagined superiority. I have no business offering anyone career advice when I can't even remember to repay loans. The conversation continued for another hour, with genuine dialogue replacing the assumptions and condescension that had characterized our family dynamic for years. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest, and honesty was what our relationships had been missing. Eventually, I left the country club and drove home to my small apartment, the place my siblings had pitied, and I'd loved for its simplicity and freedom from the burden of managing excessive space and possessions. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Mother. I hope I'm not calling too early, she said. I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at the photographs of the house, crying and laughing and remembering. I'm glad, I replied honestly. That's exactly what I hoped the gift would do. I want to visit it, Mother said. Soon, with you. Would you come with me to Vermont, to see the house, to help me remember everything and start creating new memories there? I'd love to, I replied. Over the next several weeks, the revelation of my financial situation continued to reverberate through the family. Some relationships improved genuinely, with relatives recognizing their mistakes and working to build more authentic connections. Others remained strained, apparently unable to move past their embarrassment at having been so wrong about my circumstances. Veronica and I had lunch a month after the party, our first private conversation since the revelation. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Veronica began, about wanting me to be struggling so your success felt more significant. That's been hard to accept because it's so obviously true and so obviously ugly about my character. We all compare ourselves to others, I said. The problem is when those comparisons become the foundation of our self-worth, rather than just data points in understanding ourselves. Veronica nodded slowly. I've been measuring my worth by external markers my whole life. The right marriage, the right house, the right lifestyle. I thought those things made me successful, made me valuable. But watching you live quietly, choosing small spaces and old cars while being genuinely content and secretly wealthy, it made me question everything. She paused. I don't think I'm actually happy. I think I'm performing happiness, showing everyone the markers of success, while feeling empty inside. That's terrifying to realize. It was the most honest Veronica had been with me in years, and I appreciated her vulnerability. So what will you do about it? I don't know yet, she admitted, but I'm starting therapy to figure it out, to understand why I need validation so desperately and how to build actual contentment rather than just the appearance of it. Nathan reached out as well, not to apologize again but to actually connect. We met for coffee and had the first genuine conversation we'd had in years, talking about our lives, our choices, our definitions of success and happiness. I've always felt like I was competing with you and Veronica, Nathan admitted. Even though we're siblings and shouldn't be competing at all. When you seemed to be struggling, it made me feel like I was winning that competition. That's messed up. It is, I agreed. But it's also human. We're conditioned to see life as a zero-sum game, where someone has to lose for someone else to win. But that's not actually true. I want to be someone who celebrates others' success, rather than feeling threatened by it, Nathan said. I want to be someone you'd actually want to spend time with rather than someone you tolerate at family gatherings. Then be that person, I replied. It's a choice you can make anytime. My relationship with my parents improved as well. They made more effort to understand my choices on their own terms, rather than measuring them against some external standard of success. They asked about my work, my projects, my life in ways that suggested genuine curiosity, rather than concern about fixing something they perceived as broken. 6 months after the party, Mother and I traveled to Vermont to visit her restored childhood home. The house was exactly as it had been in her memories, or as close as historical photographs and her descriptions could make it. Watching her walk through rooms she'd played in as a child, seeing her tears of joy and nostalgia, I knew the gift had been worth every dollar spent. This is what wealth is for, Mother said as we sat on the porch, overlooking the same Vermont mountains she'd seen as a child. Not just accumulating money or displaying it, but using it to create meaning, to honor love, to build connections between past and present. That's exactly right, I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence, both of us understanding that something fundamental had shifted in our family. The revelation of my financial situation had forced everyone to confront their assumptions, to recognize how they'd treated me based on those assumptions, and to question their own definitions of success and worth. A year after the party, I was having dinner with Veronica and Nathan when the conversation turned to our childhood. Remember when we used to fight over everything? Veronica asked. Whose grades were better? Whose achievements mattered more? Who got more attention from Mom and Dad? We were competing for validation, Nathan observed, trying to prove we were worthy of love and recognition. But love and recognition aren't finite resources, I added. Someone else succeeding doesn't diminish your own success. Someone else being loved doesn't mean you're loved less. We all got caught in a system that made us compete when we should have been supporting each other. So what now? Veronica asked. Now we do better, I replied simply.